The legend begins with twin babies, Romulus and Remus, suckled by a she-wolf under the watchful eyes of the Tiber. It is a bedtime story so dramatic that you half expect Disney to swoop in with a song about how feral parenting formed an empire. But if you peel back the poetic layer, you find that Rome didn't spring fully armed from a wolf's teeth. It evolved through a cultural cuddle from its older neighbor, the Etruscans. Herodotus, the Greek writer and poet, painted the Etruscans as the shipborne settler from, where else? Greece. And later Roman writers leaned into the exotic backstory as well. But a century of archaeology had already hinted at a homegrown origin, tracing Etruscan culture back to Italy's Villanovan Bronze Age communities. And now ancient DNA has settled the debate once and for all. Modern genetic studies reveal that people we call Etruscans were overwhelmingly descended from the same Bronze Age tribes that had long inhabited Tuscany and Umbria, rather than newcomers from Anatolia or Greece. Long before Rome even had sandals, the Etruscans were laying down city grids, carving tombs into rock, and throwing parties that would make any modern foodie blush. They ruled central Italy from roughly the 8th to the 3rd century BCE, running an international trade network that spread olive oil, pottery, and high fashion across the Mediterranean. Rome, at that point a scrappy cluster of huts, simply watched and learned. Until recently, much of this influence felt theoretical, pieced together from pottery shards and ancient texts. Then, archaeologists in Tuscany uncovered 24 bronze statues entombed in a thermal bath for some 2,300 years. These sculptures of Hygeia, Apollo, and local deities bore both Latin and Etruscan inscriptions, proving that Etruscans and Romans not only coexisted, but worshipped side by side in rituals we are only beginning to understand. In southern Tuscany's Podere Canici, another dig revealed an Etruscan necropolis untouched by looters. The grave goods, bronze vessels, gold earrings, even fragments of woven linen paint a vivid portrait of Etruscan life persisting under Roman rule. It is as if the Etruscans quietly whispered their traditions into the ear of an empire that thought it was speaking only Latin. Today, on Knowing is Winning, I will talk about how much of what we consider essentially Roman was actually inherited from the Etruscans. For instance, and above all, imagine you're leafing through a Roman inscription carved in neat angular letters and feeling a surge of civic pride, only to realize that every stroke of that Latin script was actually a 4-league game of cultural hot potato. First, Phoenician traders turned Egyptian hieroglyphs into a lean 22-letter abjad, sailing it across the Mediterranean. Greek settlers in Comea borrowed that Phoenician toolkit, tweaking it into the Euboean alphabet. The Etruscans adapted that version next, nailing it down in Tuscany around 700 BC. Then passed it on to Rome, where scribes finally whittled it into 23, then 21 letters before it became the alphabet we know today. So each time you sign your name, you're actually cameoing in a Phoenician Greek-Etruscan relay race. And while Rome boasted that the toga was its national costume, it was really just an Etruscan hand-me-down called the tibina. Picture a simple semicircular cloak draped over one shoulder in Etruria. Then imagine Roman tailors stretching and layering it until it became a 6-meter cotton candy of wool that only a professional draper could arrange without tripping. Over centuries, The toga went from practical wrap to formal straitjacket, symbolizing Roman citizenship and class. But its roots were firmly Etruscan, as seen in tomb paintings and bronze statuettes, where both men and women wore a version of that drape long before Cicero even donned it in the Forum. If you have ever admired a glittering bronze fibula that held a cloak in place, think an Etruscan goldsmith. These safety pin lookalikes weren't just functional. They were jewelry statements crafted with multicolored inlays of glass and enamel. Romans embraced fibulae wholesale, using them to fasten tunics and show off rank, yet the earliest surviving examples come from Etruscan graves loaded with grave goods and elaborate metalwork that no Latin artisan could match for finesse. Religion. Religion provided another conveyor belt of ideas. The Romans inherited divination practices, haruspicy, the reading of animal entrails, the augury, the interpretation of bird flight, from Etruscan priests known as haruspices. These rituals, once the exclusive domain of Rhetoria's so-called disciplinarians, became enshrined in Rome's state religion, complete with lictors, facies, the very omens that could make or break a consul's day in an office. Rome simply co-opted the rituals, built their own templum-marked Augraph chapels on the Capitoline, and well, never looked back. Imagine or not, but even Rome's world-famous engineering sprang from Etruscan innovation. The distinctive Tuscan column, the arched bridges over the Tiber, and the underground drainage tunnels, those were blueprints borrowed from Arturia's hilltop cities. When Rome bragged about its Cloaca Maxima and the Aqua Appia, it was essentially scaling up Etruscan sewer building know-how to handle millions of urban residents instead of a handful of swamp-drained villages. Rome's early urban planning, with its Cardo and Documano streets intersecting at the Forum, mirrored Etruscan town layouts. Public spaces for markets and assemblies, drainage system to whisk away stormwater, and monumental gates like Rome's Pons Sublicius were direct descendants of Etruscan prototypes that emphasized order and communal pride. And let's not forget the gladiator games. What began in Etruscan funeral rites, combat staged to honor the dead, evolved into the gladiator spectacle of the Colosseums. The Romans took the somber ritual, added tiers of marble seating, and turned it into their greatest crowd pleaser, but the first fighters were Etruscan nobles settling ancestral debts at the tomb's edge. Next time you stroll through Rome's ruins, admire a Roman mosaic, or don a toga replica for carnival, remember there is a good chance you're wearing, building, or worshipping the legacy of Etruscans. They were the hidden co-creators of what now we call Roman, and without their alphabet, architecture, and artistry, the story of Rome would look very different. More indigenous, less international, and decidedly less glamorous. And this was Knowing is Winning. Thank you very much for watching.